All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Bacasa. This week, we've got Geoff Vukelich on the line. Geoff, you're with Damn Goods Gear. You're a custom gear manufacturer for things like paddles, fly rods, nets. I've seen snowshoes, etc. And what's really cool is it's all custom, no molds, no nothing. This is just like real live stuff, which I just love. Very little waste, etc. And I think a really unique kind of touch and feel to it that's very dedicated to you and your teammates. So this is really cool for me to sit down with you and talk through some of this. And it's extra cool for me because I just learned that you're also a cancer survivor too. So I think with that, you get a little bit of perspective on life that changes. We may talk a little bit about that, but you're from Duluth, Minnesota. You kind of born and raised, you traveled around, went up to Alaska, did some things. You've got it as a fly fisherman. You've quit, I think, fly fishing for a bit and got away from it. And that recentered you. And you've since focused on, hey, if I'm going to guide or do things with fly fishing, it really has to be real to me. And there are some circumstances around that, which I just love because you put yourself first in that scenario, which is cool. And then the last is we're going to talk about today one of the techniques that you really like, and that's streamer fishing, and streamer fishing in particular to three species, and that's brook trout, lake trout, and your lake run browns, your big browns. So we're going to target that for a little bit. And then the last we're going to wrap up, which is your perspective on a tip, and that's how to branch out a little bit and try different things and why that's so important. So Geoff, welcome to the call, man. I'm glad to have you on. Let's dive in here.
Yeah, appreciate that, man. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, good. So, we talked a little bit earlier, and you had a couple areas that you were of interest in it around the business that I listened to. You were on Fly Fish 97, Mark Hockley, which is a great show. You also did an IF4 video, et cetera. So before we get kind of wrapping around the streamer stuff, I think first of all, tell us how do we get a hold of you, and then second, your vision with the gear.
Yeah, thanks, man. So you can get a hold of us at damngoodsandgear.com. That's our .com page, and then our handle for all of our socials is at damngoodsandgear. And we're active on both. So that's a great way for people to reach out. We still do the classic telephone, text message, Insta chat, whatever's easiest for folks.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how to get a hold of us per se. We're located in Duluth, Minnesota. Like I said, I kind of nomaded around for a while, but I was born and raised in Duluth. I came back in the mid 2000s, if you will. In the business for us, so we'd been building things ever since we were kids. My dad wasn't. We didn't have a lot, but what we did was kind of you had to build your own. If you kind of wanted something or repair it, we just didn't have the ability. So growing up, you were very mindful of the fact if you got something really nice, like you had to take care of it, you had to maintenance it, you had to, it was part of you, like it had prestige. This is something that was either handed down. And then as I got older and, as I was fishing and kind of growing up, you started to see, especially in the 80s and 90s, you saw that throwaway culture kind of come into account and just kind of bummed me out. And then I was still building stuff, and I built things for folks. We didn't actually hang the sign until 2016. I call hanging the sign paying taxes, right? So we went legal in 2016, and it was great. And I was able to take all of that energy that I have that I want to create, and I can turn that into something for somebody. So all of our wood products use reclaimed, upcycled, or re-salvaged wood. So we use very little new wood. The cool part about that reclaimed or older wood or reuse wood is it has stories. So when we find this wood, let's say yourself, like you have some old scrap that you were just going to get rid of. It's an old cabinet. Well, I would ask you, like, where did it come from? Where was it? Like, who was living in there? And then as you buy these products, I pass those stories on to that end user so that that end user understands like this piece of pitch pine or this piece of beech nut or this piece of mahogany that's in this net came from a bed frame from Fort McCoy in 1941, and like
Right.
this is from a sawmill that was milled in 1921, and it was an old growth piece of white pine that came off of a cabin in Cook, Minnesota. Like that's the type of stuff you don't get anymore, and I feel like if you know more about the product, if you know more about how it's built, it's easier for a person to be mindful
Mm-hmm.
about how it's made. And then um, we put a lifetime warranty on builder's quality. So I want you to have this for the life of your product. Like I want you to own this for as long as you're alive and hopefully hand it down to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So we do the crazy thing and say we're going to put a lifetime warranty on builder's quality. So if
Right.
you buy a product from us that you have a glue delam or something like that, like you just send it back to us and we fix it for free. That's my goal, is to be able to bring the craft back into it. You're seeing a big craft explosion across the whole world. However, I'm taking it very, very isolated look at it and making sure that we're making that these renewable resources we're treating them with the respect they deserve. So
Yeah.
it's kind of it's a very kind of high level view of our business, but that's really my passion, is to be able to create a one of one. This is every piece we make is different. I don't have any jigs. Granted, we have sizes of nets, so the size will be the same. Um, but we freeform our nets, so they're never the same shape. They're never the same piece of wood. They're never the same thickness. I take notes of what I've done, but basically I work with each customer one on one to create the right length, the right handle diameter, the right combinations of wood, everything. It is literally made exactly how you want it to every time.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a niche business. Like I get it. Some people are just happy to say, "Hey, I want something cool from you."
Yeah.
We do that. We do that also. But usually the people we get, there's always a process that
Like
goes
a
with
full
that.
custom. Yeah.
Full custom, yeah. And what's really neat is I find that as these builds go on, so if let's say you called and you were gonna make a net, we'd talk about like do you like contrasting colors? Do you have any wood that's important to you? Do you have any items that you want to incorporate? And usually the first time we meet, people kind of are like, oh, I'm good. You decide. It doesn't matter to me. And
Right.
then as we start the process, I start like getting the spine of the of the net, or we start building the handle of the paddle, or we start laying out certain pieces on the rod. I'll call them back and say, okay, we're at our what we call mid stage, where if you want to make decisions, now is the time. And usually, as the build evolves, so does the relationship between myself and the customer, which is really
And the product probably, I would think
in the
too, right?
product. Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
So the questions at the beginning of you decide, it's not a big deal to me, all of a sudden are, hey, this is where we're at. This is the piece of wood I'm using, and then well, yeah, maybe I would like to see this, and maybe I would like to see that. That's what I'm really trying to draw out of that
Yeah.
customer is, I can honestly say in all the years I've been doing it, we've only really had probably two or three people that I wasn't able to connect with
Mm-hmm.
on like a very cool level, when we build these products to where they've really invested in the creation of it so that they
Mm-hmm.
get what they want, not
Hmm.
close to what they want. Um, that's really important to me because I feel like there's
Yeah.
too many people that just, you can go into any fly shop, you can go into anywhere, and you can just buy a net and they stamp them out of a factory. And I'm not knocking the people that do that. I'm just saying that's how those are made. And what you know, what do you have into that? Like, what does that net mean to you? And if it doesn't mean anything, that's fine. If you're not the person that's about, but that those aren't the people that I'm kind of selling to. So
Yeah.
I meet some really cool people. I met some great people. A lot of them become friends. A lot of them become clients. So it's really neat. So we do really weird things too, as far as incorporation. So we'll do inlays of, let's say you have like a walking stick from a grandfather, or you have a picture frame
Ah.
that was
Okay.
handed down. You just send that piece to me, and I'll incorporate it in there. We've inlaid leaves and notes from loved ones, like you name it, and we can put it into a paddle or a landing net or a piece of that into there, so that there's a special sentimental part of you in that piece also, which I think if you surround yourself, Mark said it when I was talking to him, like if you surround yourself with really good craft one-off, good energy pieces, I'm a firm believer that it will help raise you up. It'll help really help you with leading a good life and enjoying it, and you have more respect for it. You surround yourself with that really kind of craft stuff. It's really good for the vibe. So
yeah, you mentioned it's kind of a throwaway society now, right?
Yeah.
And you obviously have a penchant for things that aren't like that. And I think the thing that I enjoyed the most out of that was each piece has a story, right?
Yeah.
And those things, they give you like a vested interest in something, right? I for some reason, for me, one of the things I always get attached to is things I find. For example, as a kid, I found a buck knife in it was a spring water at a camp, and it was like the coolest thing. I thought I was a hero. I found a buck knife.
Right.
I was an adult now. I had a knife. My dad let me keep it, et cetera, et cetera. And it had this like amazing story. It was a buck knife. It wasn't anything like ultra special, but it was so special to me. But same thing. I found a net on the Madison once, and it was like, man, this is like, I remember when this thing came down the river, and I sat it next to my truck all day and wrote on the window, and nobody picked it up, and I got to keep it, and yada, yada, yada. So I agree. There are like vested interests. And then especially when you start to do the custom side of like, okay, tell me a little bit more. How about this? What about that? Oh no, I want the end of the handle to be tapered so I can slip it in my belt real easy. I want,
so true,
a deep basket versus a shallow basket, because I do go to lakes where there are bigger fish or whatever, So that is really cool.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So the other thing too, like I feel it really breeds honesty also. In the fishing world, whether it's fly fishing or spin fishing, right? There's always, I hooked 10 monsters today. Yeah, congratulations. How many did you land? None. Okay, yeah, so they were giants, right? So what's interesting is like it breeds honesty, because if you're gonna come to me and say like, hey, I'm gonna go, I want a landing net. The first question I'm gonna ask you is like, what do you fish for? And how do you fish? And if you want to say I catch big fish, like, okay, how big are these fish? Oh, mid 20s all day. Okay, I'm going to build you a mid 20s net, right? And
where do you fish? Oh, I blue line in the Appalachians.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So the funny part for me is like we see this a bunch, and it doesn't hurt my feelings, because if we do make a product that when it's done, and let's say you order one and you don't like it, I'm not going to sell it to you. You don't have to pay for it. Like, we'll build you another one. And I take that product and we auction it. Basically what we'll do is we create a silent auction or an Instagram auction, and then we give all of that money to a local nonprofit. So
cool.
We do that like 3-4 times a year. We give away a ton of product. And it feels good for me to do that. So that's why we choose to do that. The reason I bring this up is, if you're not honest and you say you catch big fish, we're going to make you a mid-20s net. And when you actually need like what we would call a standard West net, which is like your 16 by 10 net. So anyways, it's just kind of funny. It just helps people be honest with themselves about it. I get super excited if I catch a 13-inch brook trout. So, whether it's 30 inches or 13, I don't really care, man.
Right,
I get excited.
I just want to get a net out there.
Yeah.
That's so funny. Well, let's do this. You obviously have a great business. It's really cool. The custom side of things, I think, is always super unique. People now know how to get a hold of you with the website, et cetera. But I want to really dive into your angling, because I do this all the time. I talk to people, and they have these unique jobs or experiences and whatnot. But what it all comes down to is it stemmed from angling. And for you, that's kind of where it started. So I'd love to talk to you about the streamer fishing you were hinting towards earlier. We didn't get too far into it because I wanted all this
Yeah,
organic content. But
I love it. I
tell me a
love it.
little
Yeah.
bit about the Brooks, the Lakers, and these big
Yeah.
browns you've been dealing with.
Yeah. So just a heavy brook trout guy through and through. They have their own kind of attitude, if you will. If you're a dry fly fisherman in Minnesota, especially in the down the southeast, they just hit dry flies differently. Like they just uh, they just don't care. They don't care.
Yeah,
They just hit, right. So up here,
predator attitude for sure.
yeah, right. Like I've caught 6-inch fish hit a 6-inch streamer. Like it's just mind boggling to me how
Mm-hmm.
they will attack anything of any size. So that's always exciting to me. So up in northern Minnesota here, we have traditionally like very alder choked streams, and pretty much every tributary of Lake Superior is gonna have some brook trout in it. Your average size brook trout is 13 inches, maybe 13 to 14. However, there's isolated pockets where you can get upwards of 20, 21, 22,
Wow,
23. So you're talking
really nice
5-pound
brook.
fish here.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are stud fish. Um, they're hard to come by, which is always the draw and excitement. Um, all of our rivers up here are freestone, and because of that, there isn't a lot of there's cold water seeps, but the water's very dark. So there isn't that death from above on clear water. So these fish aren't spooky. Like you could catch fish that are 5 feet in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
However, you have to be very mindful of time and temperature. These rivers skyrocket with if there's not a lot. If we have a dry winter, or a dry summer, dry winter, you got to be very mindful of that. So my angling for that has always been go to the most remote tributaries to Lake Superior as we can, and northern Minnesota is pretty remote, and there's just not a lot of accessibility to these rivers. So you really got to want it, and a lot of times, even when you want it, your trophy is a 10 or 11-inch fish, which is great.
Yeah.
Like we're happy with that, right? So, um,
Let
so
me
knowing that, go ahead.
let me ask you this. So you said you go to remote tributaries. Are they remote in that you're going way up into the tributary, or are they remote as in they're hard to get to, but I'm really fishing closer to the lake because I want to see fish
Oh,
coming off the lake?
yeah, so these are primary. So to classify in northern Minnesota and Ontario and a couple of the other Great Lakes, we have what's called coaster brook trout. So coaster brook trout are trout that live in Lake Superior or a Great Lake and then migrate into the rivers to
Mm-hmm.
spawn and sometimes feed. These fish inherently get bigger quicker. They have a lot more protein base to eat in with the whitefish and Cisco. And herring and tulaby in Lake Superior. So these fish will grow really fast, and that's where the Minnesota state record was caught. Was called a coaster. So primarily, the rivers on the north shore of Minnesota all have barriers within about 1,000 feet of the lake.
Mm.
There's a handful that don't, but primarily most of them do. So if you fish above those barriers, I call those fishing for resident fish. And if you fish below those barriers, we call them fishing coasters.
Okay.
And coaster fishing is fantastic. I'm a big coaster fisherman also. We'll go up even into Ontario. They have a great coaster population, the Nipigon strain brook trout. That's storied and has been for years.
Mm-hmm.
And those fish are amazing. They're great to catch. They have that same kind of attitude. However, I'm not a purist, but I feel like if you're gonna
Right.
catch
Right.
a resident fish that's in the 20s, like that's the show. And I've been lucky enough to catch a lot of fish over 20. Unofficially, my biggest resident was 23, and it was just a shade over 5 pounds.
Wow.
And that was my favorite fish to catch. So, but realistically, 20-inch brook trout. I mean, if anybody's caught a 20-inch brook trout before, like I don't care if it's a hatchery fish
Yeah.
or
Let me
or a
shake your hand.
coaster. Yeah, those are stud fish. So,
Right.
um, so when I go to these remote places, I usually go away from the lake. So I'm looking for resident fish at that
Okay.
point. I feel they fight a little bit different. They have a little different attitude and a little different way they handle themselves versus a coaster trout. So we'll go. There's sections that do have cold water seeps, and these cold water seeps are like a key marker for big fish, and it's hard to find these seeps. Basically, what I do is I'll pick a section of water. Yeah, I'm very I'm a geological kind of person,
Mm-hmm.
so I'll study a lot of different maps, a lot of
Mm.
different hydrologies to try to figure out like potentially where there could be some types of seeps, and then I'll go try
Find
to
those
find these
areas. Yeah.
areas.
Okay.
And in my experience, I don't claim to be a fish biologist, but in my experience, if you can find a very, very strong seep within 500 feet of that seep, you will find a very, very large brook trout.
Yeah. There's some type
That's
of
how,
residence there, but you're just not sure
yeah,
exactly where. Hmm.
yep, and that's how they survive. So, like, as the water levels drop, and you can see from spring melt to fall drought, you can see 10 feet of water difference in a lot of these streams. Like, a lot
Mm.
of them are very fruitful in the spring, and they will literally be dry in the fall. So, finding these pockets of stretches of remote water that have cold water seeps allow those fish to just sit in those cold water seep pools or near those, and maintain good temperature and also maintain feed. So inherently those resident fish are older, but if you can find those seeps, it can be absolutely extravagant fishing,
When
and
you
that's
when
kind of
you
what we look at.
when you find those seeps, you had mentioned uh, the tidal scenario, right, of water going
Yeah,
up and down. Do you
yeah.
find that the prime lives for those fish remain the same, as in they remain in the deeper holes and undercuts, etc., regardless of the um, depth of the water, or do you see them move out of those deep holes and whatnot in the shallower water because the seep is providing cold water, etc.? I'm curious to hear if there are any kind of migratory scenarios within that 500 feet or so, like you said.
110, yes, 110% there is. So because there's a lack of good insect hatches
Mm,
up here, their forage base is primarily large protein. So it's going to be crayfish, it's going to be rainbow dace, it's going to be common dace. Every once in a while, you'll get some shiners. Black nose shiners are a common shiner.
hmm.
So they're already meat eating fish. Not that there isn't stoneflies and small hatches around, but not to the degree that you would see them in a more fertile area. Like,
Hmm.
we're fractured granite and muck. That's what northern Minnesota is great best known
Yeah,
for.
not the best aquatic insect
Yeah, yeah.
entomology, or I'm sorry, ecology.
Exactly. So in what I have found is the fit is if you can find a seep and in the early part of the year. So a lot of people, if brook stickleback is another common minnow that you see up here a lot, and a lot of people don't like to fish them. There's a native species of common brook stickleback, and then there's an invasive. And I'm going to be speaking about the native version.
Okay.
So those fish thrive on the brook trout thrive on those small bait fish when they start to school for spawn, and that usually happens like June and middle of June, early July. And there's a period of about 3 weeks of, if you have a good winter melt and those bait fish go into spawn, that it will be ridiculous. You cannot scare the fish away. Like,
Hmm.
they're so keyed in on that forage base. The only thing I can compare it to is like the salmon fly hatches, or like the huge hopper hatches out west,
Right.
where it really doesn't matter. You just got to get something out there and make a splash, and something's going to hit it.
Kind
That's
of
the
like bull
same
trout
situation.
on the run.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah.
Same
Okay.
things. So brook trout are, especially resident, are the exact same. The only kicker is you have to find the appropriate water, and you have to find that appropriate pile of bait fish. So keeping in mind that with low water, a lot of those bait fish can just be in these side channels, in these small pools. Those brook trout aren't going to go chase them around. If the water is the appropriate level, you're going to see those fish move immediately into that fast water.
Hmm.
So my experiences up here, early parts of the year. So our season opens for stream trout in April, and I really don't bother to fish resident brook trout until almost mid-May.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's
Not
when
that
they
we
start
can't
their
get
run
them. Yep.
on
But
the food at
usually,
least.
exactly. Usually that early season, they're just buried. They're not moving. They're still in hard winter. That water's still only 38 degrees. A lot of these rivers freeze, because they're not spring fed. So like there is a
Uh-huh.
solid sheet of ice on these entire rivers. So they're not even open in the wintertime. So they're not seeing daylight. These fish go very, very dormant in the winter. And then as that spring starts to crack and as those rivers start to open, that energy comes back into those fish. They're more aligned with like a lake trout or a trout or a lake species fish, I should say, that gets covered over. So it's a lack of light, it's a
Mm,
lack of oxygen. There isn't any plant growth, so you got very small bits of bait fish. Those fish don't want to move to burn energy. That is exactly what happens up here. So when it's right.
yeah.
And it's like I said, it's realistically like a 3-week window, because as soon as those water, that water warms up quick, it's dark colored, so it absorbs light a lot faster. So you're going to see that water heat up quicker. And as soon as that water starts to crack about 58, 60 degrees, like you will immediately see a downturn, and those
Hmm.
fish will come from out of the runs, and they'll start to dive back into those pools, and they'll start to dive into those seeps. So the
Yeah.
one really fun way that we fish them, and a lot of clients that always look at me like I'm crazy, but we'll skate about a 4-inch streamer, 4 to 6 inch streamer across whitewater, and those
Mm,
fish will come airborne.
interesting.
They'll be tucked behind rocks. So literally, you'll high stick about a 4-inch articulated streamer across, and those fish will come airborne across any riffle. And that's just it's amazing when you see it, because it just shows you how much they want to feed when food is available.
Right. Like we have
And
this
then
short window. Let's take advantage of it kind of scenario.
exactly. Yep. 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 And when it's good, it's good. Like, yeah, I honestly say those are probably the only 3 or 4 weeks of the year that I entertain guiding,
Mm-hmm.
because I know they're healthy. The water's still cold. The fish will get released quick. And they're a quick bite. So, that's the
Huh.
prime time. But it's that as they
That's your
move,
hatch
they,
season. I mean, if you had a hatch chart, I mean,
yeah.
that's what it is, right?
Yep, yep, pretty much, man. And it's fun when it happens. But those fish do move around. In my instances, like I said, those fish live within about 1,000 feet of that seep, because if they go out further than that, they may not get another seep, and they'll end up dying
Okay.
off. And it's very, so if you can find them, I've known a lot of guys too that have put like, I've heard about, I've seen them where they put thermometers on their boots.
Mm,
So a guy just goes around and sips on beer and walks up the stream and checks their boot every once in a while.
hmm.
And if that drops by a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, you're getting close to a seep, and then you just
Yeah.
start working that area back and forth. And those differentiations are like 5 degrees,
Yeah.
like
Right. Right. Right.
anywhere from like 2 to 5 degrees.
When you talked about their forage, right? Of we've got dace, we've got minnows, we've got etc. Do
Mm-hmm.
you um do you put some consideration into that when you're getting ready for the day, etc.? Are you looking for a specific type of bait fish and mimicking them, or are you using more attractor patterns, or do you just have some go-tos? Curious around that.
So yeah, so I do have a couple of go-tos that are kind of like a combo. Like I tie them myself. They're not my own creation, because that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But it's just a rehash of somebody else's shit. But realistically, um, if I'm in a system that has a black nose shiner, so traditional black nose shiners are going to be right around that like 3.5 inch, 4-inch range. That's an adult size shiner. They're a very wide body. If I'm in a system that has those, I'll upsize my fly. Keeping in mind that like my average streamer fly for a brook trout is like about a 3-incher, like 2.5, 3 inches. It's a big fly, and it's an
Yeah.
articulated fly with a single hook. A lot of people think I'm weird for fishing that way, but they don't care. They don't care, and when the bite's on, they want the biggest meat possible, and they just want to eat it and eat it and eat it, because they don't know when it'll happen again. So Same deal. So if I'm in the system that has shiners, we'll upsize. Realistically, for the most part, I fish a white and olive pattern.
Hmm.
So the main fly I'll use is like similar. It's like kind of like a combination between like a white death and like a drunken disorderly almost.
Hmm.
It just has it's just a piece of rabbit fur with a cut hook on the front, a small piece of braid into a rear trailer with a cone head, and then just like some wrapped cross-cut hair on the front.
Yeah.
Um, it just gets a really silky. It has that really smooth action on the back. Keeping in mind that like muddlers will work. Like you can throw the classic woolly buggers, like they'll work, but primarily if you can get an articulated fly that has that action, I honestly believe that you catch more fish up
Yeah.
here with that action. It looks less like it just is more fluid, right? So that's kind of my go-to My go-to will usually be weighted. I don't throw a lot of weighted line, because realistically we're catching these fish in like a foot and a half of water, two
Right.
feet of
Small
water. Like
streams.
they're
You
not
don't have the length,
small.
right? So you fish a
Yep,
floating
yep,
line, probably, I would assume
yep,
a little bit shorter leader, and then
yep.
you use the elevation of your rod tip to manage your height in the water column.
100. Yep, exactly. So, and it sounds really weird, but like there's a lot of times where there's no like it's one roll cast and then you mend it down. Like
Hmm.
you just keep paying line and you mend that line down underneath 17 trees that are underhanging. Like it is a jungle. A
Right.
lot of people call it jungle fishing. But you can't really cast. So for me, it's always so fun. I'm kind of an engineering mind. Like obviously, the business is part of that, and I've done things, and so I know physics. And if you know physics, you can make that fly do crazy weird things if you know the relationship between the line or the drag that your line creates, the current that the river is
Hmm.
moving at, and any potential slack. So,
So you left
like
and right mend, I would assume, to kind of put
yeah,
that wave in the line and get a reaction on your fly. Is that what you're
yeah,
describing?
yep.
Okay.
Yep. So like a classic pattern for me is like you'll have like a little tail out riffle, but it's all overhanging with alder. So you literally can't cast. So what we'll do is I'll get it in the current and then I'll pay line out until I can get that fly under.
Hmm.
And then if it's contrary to belief, I'll mend at the bank. And when I mend at the bank, it draws that fly way in tight. And then I pull rod downstream, and it actually will shoot that fly upstream under the alder, and it immediate like almost anytime you do that under alder, like you'll get
Hmm.
an immediate hit. Um, so that's the fun part for me is constantly working on different ways to move that fly without actually casting. I
Right.
don't claim to be the best caster. Like
No, yeah.
I'm okay, right? And I always laugh because I watch these guys do it and I'm in awe because I'm okay, but I don't claim to be the best. But man, if we're gonna slide a if we're gonna slide a number 14 underneath a bunch of alder and around three rocks and not cast, like you get me on that, man. Like I'm your guy for
Yeah.
that. Um,
It's a
but that's
different
how.
technique. A lot of people don't practice that. I see that with like beaver dams, for example.
Yeah,
You get a deep
yeah,
hole and you're like, oh, the hole's deep, and you want to be right on a dam, but you don't realize that dam at the hole goes under 5, 6 feet sometimes.
yeah,
And you
yep.
got to get it
It's
under there, moving around and try not to hang
yeah.
up and everything else. And then as soon as you hook up, you got to get it out of there.
You got to get it out of there. So
Yeah.
we're a big. So like I'm a big glass guy.
Okay.
For the only reason of so from my rod building perspective, like if you're fighting shaky fish, and I call any type of shaky fish like any type of trout usually is a shaky fish. I call them
Hmm.
shaky fish. They'll bend in the middle, right? So if you're fighting a shaky fish in what I consider skinny water, so skinny water is anything that's like 2.5 feet, 3 feet below. Like
Hmm.
you will lose more fish if you have a fast to extra fast rod, period.
Hmm.
And it's nothing more than physics. So there isn't enough absorption in that fast action rod as that fish starts to hammer that you won't get slack in your line, because the tighter you can't pull them any tighter, because if you're using 5x or you're using 4x, you can't put any more pressure on them, and you'll get that rod does not have absorption. So that's why I choose to fish with glass
Mm.
or a very, very moderate graphite. Moderate graphite doesn't exist a lot anymore. It's
Yeah.
just everybody's power fishing. So that's why there's this glass movement. And that's why I like glass. And the glass has a very specific application. So back to my rod building part of it, like if I'm fishing very tight, small stream, it's all glass or cane. Like, and the reason is because you get a good fish, like 2 pound brook trout, like in 1.5 feet of water, 2 feet of water. You have to have a lot of absorption in your rod because you can't pay them any line. You got to
Mm-hmm.
start working them back. And usually it's always a hook pop. Like that's 90% of the time how things get lost. And that hook pop happens because either A, that line loops back around, or B, you have slack, and slack is created if you have too stiffer of a rod or you have too hard of an action. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people want to talk about weights, like, oh, that's why I use a 2 weight. That's why I use a 3 weight. Well, you can, but keep in mind, you can also fish those fish with a 5 weight, glass
Yep.
5 weight, and you can take that same rod and you can go catch a 22 pound or a 22 inch brown and have the same fighting ability. So that's why I always, when I
Yeah.
build rods, I try to discuss with people, like, what are you looking for here, right? Because at a certain point, rods are expensive, and I'm a rod junkie, but a lot of people can't afford a million different rods. But so that's kind of
And
so that's
it's
kind of my
you hit on it too, that you don't have a lot of line out, so you don't
yeah.
have this exorbitant amount of stretch in your line that's also absorbing energy, etc. It's it's all usually so close to your rod tip that your rod tip is like this.
Yeah.
It's on a different wavelength, right, than the
Yeah.
fish is,
110%.
right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's where you're getting that hook pop, etc. Because it's reacting in a different pace than what the fish is, and
Great,
not able to
great way
absorb
of
it.
explaining it.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. So we like when we would bring people up, like anybody from the South or anybody from the West, like it was always I always took it for granted that a lot of those people or they would know more because the West is such prestige and
yeah.
it's it's just very good. Like I'm not knocking it at all. It's great. I love going out there. So when people come visit me or they come to be one of my clients, it's always like, oh man, sorry. Like I always feel like I'm the trailer trash guy in northern Minnesota, right? So I'm like, well, you'll be fine. But it's amazing because we have such a neat ecology up here that people don't know how to fish it, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really fun to me to show people, like, you don't have to be a great caster. You just got to watch the water. And there's one thing that really helped me as a fisherman. It was just watching the water and watching how bubbles and watching how leaves, throw your line out there and just watch it move through the water and realizing that it's all physics based. Like it's not magic. Like if you can understand the resistance of things, you can mend places where big fish live.
Mm-hmm.
I even took some underwater cameras right when they first come out and stuck and kind of like got them underneath log jams because I wanted to learn, right? How
Yeah.
do you learn? Sure enough, like those big fish live in those really nasty spots. And
Oh yeah.
how do you get there? Right? You can't cast there. Usually you can't cast. You got to mend that line in there somewhere. So that was always a really big thing for me for stream
Yeah.
fishing.
It's funny you say that because one of the early pieces of advice I got was, if you're not losing flies, you're not in the right place.
Yeah. Interesting point, man.
And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, you're right. Because, you walk down to the bank and you see the beat out path and the nice little place to stand and you want to fish there. And granted, there's
Mm-hmm.
probably fishing there, but it's easy access. Everybody's going there. It's probably been hit
Right.
3 or 4 times that day or week or whatever. But,
Right.
go to the place where it's really hard to get into. And then when you get that cast, you have to do these extra things to get it right.
Yeah.
That's where the potential for, something super special is, in my opinion, able to happen because they're just not seeing it,
So the one thing I found, I had talked with a biologist up in certain parts, certain flowages of Alaska, and he said currently you have a better opportunity of catching a uncaught fish in northern Minnesota sometimes than you are on systems in Alaska. And it's not meant to be a knock to anybody or anything, but it's to your point, and I would agree, and that's why I seek that out. Fish, if a fish has very little to no pressure and has never seen a presented fly, to me, you immediately know. Like, I just feel like they act differently,
Yeah.
they attack differently, they fight differently, and half the time they come back at it
Yeah.
again after you let them go, and you come back through, and they will hit it again. And
Yeah.
to
There's a
me, it's
level
more
of like reckless abandonment to their home, right?
exactly, yeah. And I feel like to me, it's much, much more satisfying, emotionally and physically to catch a fish that's probably never seen a human than that's only 10 inches
Yeah.
versus catching a 22 pounder that's been hooked 15 times, right? Like that's it may not be the best analogy, but that's some of the really like mindful, like really dive into it. And like, it's so special. It's so much more than just going out and hucking line.
Yeah.
So, but
Well,
yeah, so
Geoff,
that's the brook trout side of it.
we're on a good topic. We're just gabbing away here. I'm looking at the time. We're not going to have time to get to Lakers and Browns. There's no way. So we're going to
That's
have to
fine.
get you back to talk about that. So I'll
Sounds
put
good, man.
that on the schedule. I'll promise
Sounds good.
everybody here on the show so I can be held to it that we're going to get you back to talk about Lakers and Browns. But in the
Perfect.
meantime, what I really want to do is cover some of the tip areas that you talked about, which is, branching out a little bit and et cetera, and why you feel that's so important.
Yeah, so I feel like we as anglers, anybody, you get kind of locked into a way of thinking and a way of doing. And unfortunately, it becomes becomes a habit and it's hard to break. Not that it needs to be broken, but what are you at a certain point, what are you learning and how are you evolving in the sport? Because every day you learn, like, and you hear this across the board, whether it's the Joe Humphreys or the Gary Loomises or the Lefty Crays. It doesn't matter. Every one of those people says you just keep learning and evolving and adapting because we don't know. Like, we can't talk to these fish. Like, we can't really understand the dynamics that they have. So for me, it's always try something new because you may not want to do it again, but it may give you insight into what you're already doing that you would have never seen if you wouldn't have tried it. And for me, it was, like I'd stated earlier, I'm not up here is not a lot of good dry flies. So when I started fishing dry flies, um, in very good places, mind you, like either out west or down in the driftless, not just hucking the Adams around
Right.
up here, but like going to a spot that has hatches that these fish are actively eating. Um, it gave me a different look on how fish moved and how they like what a skittish fish really looks like and how it moves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is up here we don't see that because very rarely do you get to sight fish anything. And if you do, they're usually like they don't care because they usually don't have a lot of depth from above.
Right.
So for me, what was really interesting to see was how they moved in and out of current. So like I knew this, and as a fisherman and a longtime fisherman, like I know how they interact with current. You can, but until you see it firsthand and watch them, come in and out from behind a rock and lift up and take a sip and come back down or move in, it it brought a kind of new level of understanding of how I fish streamers and that, oh, like that fish is tight to the edge. Like it's tight to the edge of that rock. It's not behind it, it's tight.
Mm-hmm.
So if I come over the top and scare him, oh, okay. So like that type of that type of knowledge isn't gained if I were to have never done it.
Right.
Now, do I still like dry fly fishing? Yeah, like I still do. Is it my go-to? Not really, but it's super fun and I like to do it. But it also gave me an insight that I don't think I would have ever been able to get if I would have just said, I'm just a dirty streamer fisherman in northern Minnesota. Like I'm just going to keep running them through the mud.
Right.
Like that's the stuff for me that like you got to go out and at least try it to see the other side of it. Because then the other aspect of it is it allows you to see another person's opinion and another person's life. And that like I completely understand that like up here, this is my life, this is our ecology, and this is how we fish. So for me to cast judgment or to maybe speak about a topic that isn't uh, around the point of reference I know, that's irresponsible of me to do that. So the more I can branch out, the more I feel like I can be part of the conversations and actually have a valid statement, to have a little validity, to say like, no, like I disagree with that. Okay, well, what's your point of reference? Well, I only dry fish, fly fish once
Right.
in my life. Okay, well, you can shut up and sit down. Like,
Right.
I don't want to sound rude, but at a certain point, like if you want to be active in a conversation, and if you're going to say something, you should at least have some type of knowledge behind it, instead of just being the armchair quarterback and saying like, oh, well, I read an article. Well, that's great, and I appreciate you for that. But have you actually tried it yourself? Because it's completely different from a motor function of a human body to reading a piece of paper about amazing dragonflies.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to concentrate just on that, but for me, that was like a very good thing for me, was realizing like it provides so much more
Yeah.
to your current way of fishing. So
Yeah. It's funny because I was fishing some uh, really clear water this weekend, and they were all seeps, like you had mentioned. And I mean, crystal clear, but deep holes. And you could see fish and good sized fish, but you could see them feeding on some level of a nymph. And each one had his own pattern, how far right or left they went, or up or down, etc. And, we caught a couple fish, and then all of a sudden you could see them still feeding, but they were now avoiding anything that you were putting out there. And
right,
initially it was, let's get a buoyant fly and we'll toss a nymph on there, right? And after beating my head into the ground for a bit, I switched to a really small fly that was gently laid out there and a really small nymph. And it was like all of a sudden they were back alive again. And it was just that difference of, okay, I'm not having this big scary thing come in above them and they're recognizing there's some kind of falsehood here. But it was really unique learning that and seeing it. And I'd probably seen it before, but didn't know what to do. But this time I had success and I remembered, it really sat with
yeah,
me. And I think that's key, is like
yeah,
trying and sometimes just beating your head off the ground until you get success, so that you can either remember, or even you don't have success, but you walk away and you go, you know what? I should have tried this. And
yeah. So
it's just
true.
such a memory bank, or I refer to it as with our listeners, is build a repertoire of moves in fly fishing. The more moves you have, the more you have in your memory bank, the more you can try. But just like
Yeah,
anything else, I always relate it to, I was a kung fu kid, and I relate it to Bruce Lee. And I say, look, the guy took all the different styles and he took what he thought was the best, and he got really good at a handful at each one. And that was his consideration of the very best. And
yeah,
if you're proficient at a handful of areas, you can often overcome a lot of obstacles. So,
yeah. That's a great point, man. Like I feel like too many, just the way that the machine feeds, and I call it the machine, but
right,
the industry, but just the way it feeds, like it really doesn't point that out, right? Like you see one, like, oh, he dug deep in his fly and now he's catching fish. Like he dug deep in his fly box and now he's catching fish. Like,
right,
but the story isn't behind that. Like, hey man, I just sat here for 4 hours and tried to catch, like nothing was working. And that's the
right.
thing for me that kills me, because it puts an undue amount of stress on anybody that's trying to learn. Like you need to learn it now. And I think the biggest thing is like take a breath. Like I'm 42 years old. Like it's taken me a long time to get here. And I still don't claim to be the best. And I look at people who are
Yeah,
55 and I'm like, I want to be like that guy. And he's looking at me like, if I knew what you knew at you. So that's the trouble. I feel like people don't want to talk about their failures enough, and all they want to talk about is like, like, oh, I just changed that fly and it worked. So like take a
right.
breath, like take a second and realize that like you have to fail to get better, because you know it didn't work.
And I think observing fly fishing for me, I tend to do more and more of this. I relate it to looking at Instagram. You look at Instagram, what do you see? You see all the good moments, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're what's different though is they're moments in time, right? So they're this captured moment. Well, let's use an example. Somebody goes up to a spring creek and they use a PMD cripple, and it's a special PMD cripple, and he's lighting it up. Well,
Yeah.
I could tell you another guy who's 10 years older or 10 years younger could probably come up with a totally different fly and light it up too. Is it really the
Right.
fly, or is it the technique, or is it whatever? I mean, use the example of, oh, I fished a dry dropper and I had an emerger RS2 on it, et cetera. Oh, and then the old guy came through and he came from the top and he swung wets and he killed it. What exactly is it? Because you're only looking at one moment,
Yeah.
you only know the one moment, and that seems like it's the solution. But often there's more than one solution. So I think
I give credit to all the folks, man, that like, and we do that on our channel too. Like we just came back. I was searching for some brown trout in northern Ontario. It's a small piece of water, like a little bit of stockfish, natural reproduction. Like it's not very well fished, and like I got good intel on it, and I went up there, and it was a complete and utter failure. Like all we caught was like 6 smallmouth, and I didn't even know there was smallmouth in the
oh, that's
river, and it
funny.
was a joke. But you know what? It's gonna go on our YouTube page because that's. I feel like people got to understand, like, if you don't try it, then you don't know.
Yeah.
You can assume a million things. It's a bottom release dam. It's 68 feet. It's like 168 feet deep. So that water should be cold. It should be cold all year. It's beautiful, clear water. You can see it. Oh, we got there and the water was 67 degrees. Like,
This is
oh,
warm water fishery. No wonder the bass are in there.
oh, you know what I mean? So like, that's the thing. Like nobody wants to post that stuff. So I feel like anybody that does, myself included, like those are the good, not that they're bad people otherwise, but like that's the real story. Like this is real life. Like Instagram doesn't do that. So I like your
Yeah.
thought. That was really good.
Well, cool, Geoff.
Cool.
It was good having you on the call. We're going to bring you back for sure. We got Lakers and Browns to talk about in more detail. And we're going to, next time you come, I'm going to have you bring a couple nets into the room so we can see them too.
Oh,
you guys
for sure. Yeah.
haven't been on the Instagram page and see some of the specialties in nets and paddles, especially something about a paddle that just, when it's glassy like that, just looks so sexy.
Yeah.
Worth sharing.
Yeah.
But go check out Geoff. You got your damn goods and gear on Instagram and Facebook, website, etc. But Geoff, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you guys next week. Catch up on a new product or a new topic. See you soon.